Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Sachs. I'm the vice chair of the board of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City and senior counsel at the Hush Blackwell Law Firm. On behalf of my law firm, I would like to welcome you to what should be an amazing hour of give and take between and among some of the most thoughtful and insightful journalists and chroniclers of history the sport of baseball has ever known. America's most well-known and respected documentary filmmaker, Ken Burns, is almost single-handedly responsible for elevating the Negro Leagues and Kansas City's own Buck O'Neil to their rightful place on the national stage. Joe Posnanski's passion for people and his love of baseball has jumped off the pages and into the hearts of baseball fans since his days as a columnist for the Kansas City Star. And speaking of national stages, Joe has continued to delight as a senior writer for Sports Illustrated, NBC.com, and The Athletic. And as for Bob Costas, well, let me take a moment to pass along some words of appreciation about Bob Costas. Ever since his days as a young broadcaster at NBC, Bob Costas's unbridled passion for sports, and baseball in particular, has always come through in his reporting. Yet Bob Costas has never looked at baseball or any sport with an uncritical eye. As baseball slogged through its steroid scandal in the late 1990s, Bob Costas was willing to speak up in public and on air about the incomparable effects of steroid use on the game. And as the NFL faced deepening concerns with head injuries and concussion protocols during the earlier part of this decade, Bob Costas considered it his duty to speak up. It may or may not have ultimately cut short his long-running gig at NBC, but it did not cost him his honor. Bob Costas, like my law firm partners and many of you sitting in on today's conversation, understands that life and baseball consists of shades of gray. As such, it is possible to abhor the fact that Black players were deprived of the opportunity to play Major League Baseball for generations, yet appreciate the resilience, the passion, and the obvious skills Black ball players brought with them each and every day and night when they competed at the highest levels of the Negro Leagues. This same resiliency, passion, and skill ultimately equipped Jackie Robinson, my idol Roy Campanella, Henry Aaron, and yes, Buck O'Neil to break down barriers and make it to the big leagues. Today, on what would have been the 109th birthday of the guy Bob Kendrick calls Old Buck, it is my great pleasure to join Hush Blackwell in welcoming you to what should be an unforgettable hour with some iconic guests. But before Bob takes it from here, that's Bob Costas, takes it from here, let's take a moment to look back at our birthday boy with the infectious smile, Buck O'Neil.
I'm not too much of a singer. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jacks. I don't care if I ever get back. We'll root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. 1, 2, 3 strikes you out at the old ball game.
Our number one story in the countdown tonight, Buck O'Neil died Friday night from cancer of bone marrow and congestive heart failure, both only diagnosed within the last month. We were privileged to be on the planet at the same time he was.
And in Carabel, Florida, and in Sarasota, where he would grow up, African-American children did not go to the same schools as the white children did.
You started playing baseball at what age? How old a man were you? How old a kid were you?
12.
12?
12 years old.
And so Buck O'Neil would not have the chance to go to Sarasota High School nor the University of Florida. His chances would have to come on the celery fields of Sarasota and the baseball fields. Buck O'Neil was a natural first baseman and a natural hitter. Playing ball for a few dollars a game helped him to work his way through Edward Waters College in Jacksonville. And in 1934, he began an odyssey through the segregated Negro Leagues, reaching their big time just in time for their heyday.
I got to be 23.
I see. Well, I got it all screwed up then. I'm
That's
sorry.
all right.
I thought you started playing professional ball when you're 12. Well, no wonder.
No, I wasn't that good. But I was good.
Yeah.
The Kansas City Monarchs, Satchel Paige and Jackie Robinson among his teammates, and black baseball's first World Series championship among his accomplishments.
It is my honor to introduce one of the most generous and most loved men ever associated with the game of baseball. A player and manager in the Negro Leagues. He's an American treasure. And baseball and all Americans are better off because of the sunshine he spreads. His always inspiring and always positive message. Please join me in welcoming my good friend, heck, everybody's good friend, Buck O'Neil.
All right, sit down. I've been a lot of places. I've done a lot of things that I really like doing. I hit the home run. I hit the Grand Slam home run. I hit for the cycle. I've had a hole-in-one in golf. So I've done a lot of things I like doing, but I'd rather be right here right now, than any place I've ever been in my life. See, I played in the Negro Leagues. Tell you what, the Negro Leagues was nothing like Hollywood tried to make it. You could have 20 of the best athletes that ever lived. And that's who we are representing here today.
I made my living in baseball now 70 years, and I'm still going to the ballpark. I want to hear that sound again.
And I love you. And what I want you to do for me, I want you to hold hands, everybody that's in this building. Grab a partner next to you. I want you to sing after me. The greatest thing in all my life is loving you. The greatest thing in all my life is loving you. The greatest thing in all my life is loving you. The greatest thing in all my life is loving you. Thank you, friend. Thank you for coming.
Well, I'm going to guess that means it's up to me. Thank you, Adam, for the very nice introduction earlier. So many things we could say about Buck O'Neil. We have an hour here. if we had 24 hours, we couldn't fill in all the great stories and all the things that could rightly be said in praise and appreciation of Buck O'Neil. But let's start here. Baseball, more so than any other sport, is a storyteller's game. The game abounds, past and present, with wonderful storytellers. And we have three of them here, and Bob Kendrick, Ken Burns, and Joe Posnanski. But I think I can say, without fear of any objection from the trio who are joining us, that the greatest baseball storyteller any of us has ever come across is Buck O'Neil. Engrossing, enchanting, endearing. So let's just start here. Bob Kendrick, give us one of, you can't pick one as the favorite, give us one of your favorite Buck O'Neil stories.
And Bob, there were so many. And that doggone Buck, man, he done had me crying all day and was about to have me on the verge of crying again when we saw the video. And there were so many great stories. You know, one of my favorite stories that he shared, Joe, and I know you will remember this, and he shared it in his book. And a lot of people, Bob, had their impression about Satchel. And because Satchel was so charismatic. And so they would take the charisma and kind of blow off the intellectual that was Satchel Paige. And so Buck used to tell a story. They were in Florida. And so Satchel says, of course, Satchel called Buck Nancy. He said, well, Nancy, Lahoma, Satchel's wife, she's going to cook fish and grits in the morning for breakfast. Now, the catch is we got to go catch the fish. And so the next day, they hire a guy, got an old outboard motorboat, and he takes them down on the Tam-Miami trails. And Satchel guys thought he was the greatest fisherman and hunter in the world, just as he thought he was the greatest pitcher in the world. And chances are he was the best at both. And so, but on this occasion, everybody had caught a fish except for Satchel. And Buck and the guys are giving it to him. Satchel, we thought you were the best fisherman in the world. We thought you said you were the best fisherman in the world. You can't fish. And Buck says that Satchel is fishing with a line that has 3 hooks on it. And wouldn't you know, 3 fish would hit at the exact same time. Satchel pulls them out, and he's dancing in the boat. I told you I was the greatest fisherman. I told you I'm the greatest fisherman. And Buck says, Satchel, stop. You're going to turn the boat over. So Satchel takes off a fish for him. He takes off a fish for Lahoma, and he throws the other fish back. And Buck says, Satchel, what are you doing? He says, well, Nancy, there's only Lahoma and we don't need the 3rd fish. So as they're now going back to the Sir John Hotel, they get into an area where there's this nest of black snakes, and Buck thought that maybe they were mating. It was just a gazillion snakes, and they had an old single repeating .22 rifle. And so Buck says he picks up the rifle, and he's going to shoot the snake. And he says, Satchel pushes the gun down, and he says, Nancy, don't shoot the snake. If the snake is at the Sir John Hotel, then you shoot it. We are the intruders. And it was a far more profound, deeper Satchel Paige than most folks actually knew. And that's one of my favorite Buck O'Neil stories about his friend Satchel Paige.
And you know, Bob, Satchel's advice should be taken to heart by the scores of people who you see these days on YouTube at Yosemite or someplace, and they think it's a good idea to take a selfie with a bison or with a bear, and then they nearly get their tail torn off or worse for their folly. So think of Satchel Paige before you decide to do that. Ken Burns, those of us in baseball and people around Kansas City like Joe and Bob knew Buck O'Neil before 1994 when your baseball documentary debuted on PBS. But it is completely safe to say that that was where Buck O'Neil was introduced to the nation. And for all the wonderful contributors and all the wonderful bits of history you dug up, I think it's safe to say that Buck O'Neil was the star of the documentary.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, you were there. There were lots of other people contributing by the dozens. But I think if you left the series after 18 and a half hours, you couldn't help but feel that its beating heart was Buck. And I think that's why we're all here together. It's so interesting that the clip that Bob put together is all filled with the love that we all felt from him. Everybody who met Buck, and I'd be out on the road with him for weeks at a time, and we get up, before dawn and be in the elevator, and the person he'd see in the elevator, he'd treat as if he was looking forward to that person the whole day. And at the end of the night of a long day of promotion, we're riding up in the elevator, and he'd meet somebody, be 11 o'clock at night, and we had to do the same thing the next day. He would love them the same way. I remember his niece said to me just after he passed away, and before I had one of the great privileges of my life to deliver a eulogy at the public memorial service in Kansas City after his funeral and burial. She said, our religious traditions, or many of them, suggest that man is made in God's image. And I realized that there's almost nothing in the things that human beings do that would suggest that's even remotely possible until you meet Buck. And then you meet somebody who has faced his share of friction, of difficulties, of resistance, all of those things, and met them with an extraordinary presence, and still manages to bring that love to everything. He was absolutely sincere that he didn't want to be any other place than where he was then. And he made everyone realize you sort of were required in the presence of Buck to stop and rearrange your own molecules, to question the sort of natural acquisitiveness that we human beings have, and to stop and relax. And so the stories about baseball, and I've got hundreds of them that he would tell me. I mean, I remember traveling from Austin down to Lockhart, Texas, where there's great barbecue, and driving back with an old friend of ours. And Buck is regaling us about that inside the park. Hitting for the cycle. And there's a big storm, maybe a tornado happening in the West, and we're keeping our eye on it. And he draws this story out for 15 minutes. And I know Bob and Joe probably know this. Bob Costas, you do too, where he just talks about where he's got a home run, he's got a double, he's got a triple, and he's got he's got a single, and he needs a triple, but he's hit a clear inside the park home run. And he finally manages to kind of stumble his way around third and pick himself up and conservatively trot back to third base to keep his perfect cycle intact. And I loved him. He was like a father to me. I mean, by the time he passed, my daughter was on her honeymoon, and she detoured several hundred miles out of her way to the hospital bed in Kansas City that would be his last room to say goodbye to him. And he just pulled my son-in-law aside and said, "Now you take care of my granddaughter." And that was Buck.
Joe Posnanski, your book, The Soul of Baseball, came out months after Buck's death in the fall of 2006. The book was published in 2007, and it's crammed full of anecdotes about Buck. You've had some time to think about it in the days leading up to this. If you have to pick just one or two, where are you going with it?
Well, I was thinking, actually, I was not in Kansas City before baseball came out. The first time I actually met Buck was when Ken brought him to Pittsburgh for the All-Star game, which was incredible. And we didn't know who he was. And Ken, I remember Ken, this is before it came out, so we had not seen the documentary yet. And I remember Ken, you saying, "This is the most extraordinary man you're ever going to meet." It was just like, and you have all these sports writers there, and I don't know that any of them knew him, or if they knew him, they only knew him in passing. And then by the end of the day, everybody was in love with him. It was that quick, because everybody got to talk to him. It was the positive, his constant positivity. So I have so many favorite stories. Bob was with me for almost all of them. Not quite all of them, as Bob will know. He didn't come with me to Nicodemus. Yeah, he didn't come with me to Nicodemus. But most of them. But for me, the one that speaks to his positivity was when we were in Houston It had been a long day. You know, we at these events he would speak, and then he would be taken in to meet a bunch of people, and then usually they wanted him to go to a ball game, and he would be at a ball game, he'd meet a bunch of people, and it was sort of at the end of the day, and he was exhausted and ready to go home. And you know, at this time he's already 92, 93 years old. So you know, it was the end of the day, and we're sitting there, and he's ready to go, and he's not even really watching the game, and between innings, somebody on the Astros throws a ball up into the stands, and he clearly is trying to throw the ball to this kid. And the kid is waiting, and just as the ball gets to the kid, an adult reaches over and takes it away from the kid. He catches the ball. And I'm sitting right next to Buck, and I just go, man, what a jerk. What a jerk. And Buck's like, what happened? And I said, you know, that he threw the ball into the stands to this kid, and the adult just reached over and caught it. And, you know, while we're talking, the adult's holding the ball up, you know, like he was some sort of hero. And Buck says, you know, shouldn't be so hard on the guy. I mean, he might have a kid at home that he's going to bring the ball to. Right. And I thought, yeah, there's Buck. You know, that's Buck's positivity. That's how he always is. And so I kind of was hushed for a minute. And then I'm like, wait a minute, Buck. If he's got a kid at home, why didn't he bring the kid to the ballpark? And Buck looks over without even hesitating, and now he's smiling. He goes, maybe his kid is sick. And I thought, I'm never going to beat him at this game, ever. You're never going to beat him at this game. And that was what he was like. The thing is, you know, Ken knows that, we all know this, but Ken and Bob and I, and just being around him so much, he never let down, ever. He was always that positive. Like, even in his worst moments, he would brace himself, and he would still be that positive guy, despite, you know, as both Ken and Bob and you have pointed out, you know, this is a guy that was denied opportunities throughout his entire life. Never got to play. Bob, Kendrick and I were talking about this yesterday. Never got to manage. I think that was the biggest one for him. I think he would have been a great major league manager. Never got that opportunity. You know, was until Ken came along, was telling these stories, and nobody was really listening. I mean, this was a life of being denied, and yet it never cut into his positivity.
No. I got sunshine on a cloudy day.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, Bob. And I was just going to say, Buck he was so thankful for what Ken had done for him, because he would always tell me, he says, Bob, I've been telling these stories for 40 years.
Yeah.
And no one ever listened. And then Ken gave him a platform, and people listened. And they listened intently.
Can I tell you, guys, a very quick story? It's a little bit personal, and I don't mean to make it about me, but I don't know about you, but when you wake up on your birthday, however old you are, you know it's your birthday, right? I'd been on the road for so many weeks. I woke up in Kansas City. We'd done an event at the stadium, Buck and I, throughout the first pitch, and it was wonderful. And I got dropped off at a hotel, and we were both flying. He was going to Cooperstown. I was going back to New England, and we were going to fly from Kansas City to Chicago and change planes. And he picked me up in his car in the morning. And it was my birthday. And for the first time in my life, the only time in my life, I forgot when I woke up it was my birthday, right? And so I'm just there. I'm being picked up by Buck O'Neil. We go to the airport. We get on the plane. We talk. We chat. And we finally are on some concourse at O'Hare, and we're splitting up. And it's what Bob said. I go away. I give him a big hug, and he says, "I love you." And I said, "I love you too, Buck." And he starts going away, and he calls me back. He says, Ken. He says, comes over, and he puts his arm around me. He says, "You know, I've been telling these stories for 40 years. And until you came along, nobody has ever really listened beyond what I've said." And I said, "Oh, Buck, man, it's you. It's, you know," and it is. He brought the life. He brought the light to the film. And so we part again. I love yous again. And I started. He calls me back, and I turn around. I think I've forgotten something. He comes up to me, and he goes, "Happy birthday, Ken." And it was, I swear to God, and any other time I'd be lying, but it was the first time that day I'd realized that it was my birthday. And that's Buck. Maybe he provided the sleep in me to not be so self-involved that I was thinking about it all the time, but he just was something else. Sorry, Bob.
I'm going to jump in here with just one small correction. It's obviously true that no one listened on a broad scale.
Right.
But if you were in Buck's company,
Yeah.
I knew him in the 80s. Tony Kubek and I are doing the Saturday afternoon game of the week on NBC. And the Royals were consistently good through the 80s. So they were often the featured team on Saturday. You go to the ballpark on Friday. You go to the batting cage, you go to the dugout, you go to the clubhouse, you talk to the managers and the players, you make a sweep around the press box, you talk to the local guys who have some insight that perhaps you don't. And then what I like to do in certain situations, not all, but in this situation for sure, not watch most of the game for the press box. Go down and sit behind the plate where the scouts sat. Now, sitting with the scouts is always a rewarding experience if you like baseball. But when one of them is Buck O'Neill, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So, Tony Kubek and I would sit with Buck O'Neill, and you'd lose track of the game because it couldn't possibly be as interesting as what Buck was telling you. And the game would be over, and it'd be like, Buck, you want to go to the press room? Just keep telling us stories. We had plans to go out to dinner. No, we'll just stay here and talk to Buck. So I think anybody who was in his smaller orbit knew and appreciated him.
That's right.
But we were happy to see what happened with Ken. But then Ken also brought out things that we did not know. And I would think, Ken, that one of the most difficult things was editing Buck, because every bit of it was gold.
Well, every bit of it was gold, and every story he told you wanted to put in. And of course, you know, the movie Amadeus, too many notes. And so we'd end up doing all these sort of fake tricks as you wait till the credits were over and you dump another story in just for whoever was listening. And, you know, I think they've long ago been cut off. But the thing is, he was witness to so much, not just in baseball history, but in American history. And he reflects so much of American history that isn't taught or isn't shared. And I think the film at the beginning really speaks to that, the lack of opportunities, the inability of someone with his talent and his intelligence to go forward just because of the color of his skin. And yet his willingness to sort of, there was a kind of affirmation in the face of adversity about everything he did. And there he is the year with the Monarchs, the year that Jackie's with them. And he's watching Jackie sort of rearrange their molecules because they're barnstorming down to Texas, and along the way in Oklahoma, they're stopping at a gas station to fill up the two twin 50-gallon gas tanks. And then they want to use Jackie says, I want to use the restroom. And the guy says, boy, where do you think you're going? And then Jackie just turns, he said, take the hose out of the tank. And the guy just does the calculus. He's not going to sell 100 gallons of gas for an awfully long time. Okay, you boys be quick about it, right? And then all of a sudden they're integrating just through Jackie's insistence. And Buck is a witness to all of that. And then, of course, he watches Jackie go forward. It's past his prime. So he's going to watch a lot of his teammates go forward. He's going to himself move because Jackie's arrival is a bittersweet moment. It's the death knell of the Negro Leagues, ultimately. Hank being the last Negro League player to play in Major League Baseball. And then he's going to have coaches, but as you've said, limited again. And then somehow emerges, not just through us, I think you're absolutely right, just through all the context as the spokesman of the game, the lover of the game, completely aware of the dark underbelly. This is, I mean, when he turns that moment in Houston into a positive moment, Joe, he's not unaware of all of the undertow of things. You know, when he asked me, he said, when I die, he says, I want you to play Solitude. That's a Duke Ellington thing. But he said, I want you to play the Billie Holiday version, which is often called In My Solitude, because that's how they added lyrics to what was an instrumental song. It is as painful and as sad a song. And so we played it that evening. Bob, remember that? We played it that evening, and everybody just stopped. And you thought of Buck as this, you know, he was just giving off all this light. And at the same time, he was totally aware that the opposite of that was the darkness that is often part of the story that we're compelled to tell, whether it's in sports, as Bob does so well, and or whether it's in our larger American history. It's a tough story, and Buck reflected it, but did it in a way that you didn't feel like it was a complaint. There wasn't a grievance involved. That's what's so wonderful. He knew it was all about us,
Bob, Kendrick, all of us in my case, a small way, in Joe's case, and especially Ken, have helped with an understanding of the Negro Leagues and have contributed something in some sense to the Negro League Museum. But Buck, being from Kansas City and being steeped in all that history, Buck was not just someone who added something, he was essential to the inception and the continued success of the Negro League Museum, right?
Oh, there is no question about it, Bob. And I say this, and I mean no disrespect to anyone who had anything to do with the formation and ultimate growth of this museum, but it does not happen without Buck O'Neil.
Right.
And so I respectfully call the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum the house that Buck built. In New York, it was the house that Ruth built, Yankee Stadium. Here in Kansas City, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is the house that Buck built. And it was just a joy to be there to witness this as it was transpiring. And again, the documentary did wonders because the museum was still very much in its fledgling state when the documentary came out. And again, people fell in love with Buck O'Neil. He was 82 years old at that time. And Ken, the headline of the Kansas City Star, after Buck's first appearance in the film, says a star is born at 82. When typically we're all shutting it down, this jettisons an entire new career for Buck. And at the same time, his museum was starting to really kind of come into the public eye.
Right.
And so the timing was absolutely perfect. And so we were able to ride that crest. But you're right, Bob. We had our power hitter in the middle of that lineup, Buck O'Neil. And when he passed away, again, it's been 14 years since his passing. When he passed away, again, to use a bad baseball analogy, you can't take your power hitter out the middle of your lineup and expect that you're going to be as potent as you were with him in the lineup. And we had to manufacture him. We had to take the Rube Foster approach because we didn't have our Josh Gibson in the middle of that lineup anymore. But, he left us with so much that we draw from.
Right.
The hope, the determination, the inspiration that were hallmarks of the Negro Leagues. And man, I told y'all, I talk to Buck O'Neil every day. Now, he don't always answer me back. But I talk to Buck every single day, as we're continuing to try to chart a pathway for his great museum. But man, it would not be a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum without Buck O'Neil.
We're going to toss this one around the horn, but Joe, I'll start with you. People of a certain age, and all four of us fall into this category. We remember the Wilbert Harrison song, Kansas City. He's standing on the corner, 12th Street and Vine. Well, if you just go 6 blocks up, you're going to get to 18th and Vine, and that's where the Negro Leagues Museum is. Now, it is not as large, and it encompasses a portion, not the entire history of baseball. So it's not as large as the wonderful National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. But square foot for square foot, Joe, I don't think I've ever been in a museum that on its own terms accomplishes what it's set out to do any better than the Negro Leagues Museum.
No, it's 100% right. Cooperstown is its own wonder, right? I mean, you're trying to tell this enormous story, and there's so many different places to go and things to see, and it's this big sprawling thing. The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, I think what makes it so special is it is one story. I mean, there are many stories told within it, but it is one story. And you walk in the door, and the first thing you see is the field, and you're blocked by chicken wire. It's the very first thing that you see is the field, and you can't get to it. And that's the story of the Negro Leagues, the story of these amazing players who were denied the chance to play in the major leagues and created their own league. And it's, it's just such a powerful experience to go through it. And, if you're lucky enough and Bob is there, Bob Kendrick is there, and he'll take you through that'll make it that much better. That was Buck. that was going through the museum with Buck was, it's one of the luckiest things of my life that and I got to do it many times with Buck, but it's so special. But it's, I'm not going to embarrass Bob here, but it's pretty close to as good when you go with Bob Kendrick through the museum. I mean, the energy and joy he brings to it, there's really nothing like it. And I hope everybody who's anywhere near Kansas City takes a couple of hours. I mean, and goes. I mean, you could spend all day there, but just give yourself a couple of hours to go through it. It's wonderful.
And the signature touch is the statues of the all-time Negro League lineup, with Buck O'Neil, by the way, in that manager or coach's position, peering through the chicken wire symbolically. But and these statues are wonderful. They're beautifully rendered. Satchel Paige is on the mound. Josh Gibson's behind the plate. John Henry Lloyd, the Black Lou Gehrig, is at first base. Oscar Charleston and Cool Papa Bell are in the outfield. It's just a pitch perfect touch.
It was brilliantly executed. It really was. And I just think back to everybody who was involved as we were trying to map out a way to tell this story in a thoughtful, enlightening, impactful kind of way. And Bob, we understood that everybody who came here were not going to be baseball fans. And of course, we obviously know that you don't have to necessarily be a fan of our game. We certainly think that's sacrilegious, but you don't have to. You don't have to be a fan of our game. But it was certainly important that when you walked away from this experience, that you understood the significance of the Negro Leagues both on and off the field. And in many respects, guys, we almost de-emphasize the players.
That's right.
Because for us, it's almost a given that you're going to come here and you're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever play this game. But by the time you walk away from this experience, I truly believe that you walk away with a deeper, greater, richer appreciation for just how great this country really is. Because this story, as you all well know, could have only happened in America. So yes, it's anchored in the ugliness of segregation, a horrible chapter in this country's history. But out of segregation rose this wonderful story of triumph and conquest. And man, it's based on one small, simple principle, as Joe mentioned. You won't let me play with you? I create a league of my own.
That's right.
And I can tell you now, there's nothing more American than that.
I agree.
And people gain that when they come here.
It's so interesting that attached to it is the Jazz Museum.
Yeah.
And the genius of jazz is the American genius of improvisation. And so the people who are unfree in a supposedly free land have to improvise much more than anybody else. And what you see as one of the byproducts of that improvisation is, of course, this great art form, jazz, but it's also the Negro Leagues. We're celebrating its 100th anniversary. It's 100 years. It was the place. I mean, we had in the late 19th century, Bud Fowler and Moses Fleetwood Walker and a handful of other African Americans playing for what was then the professional leagues, and Cap Anson and others said they wouldn't play. And the so-called, I don't know why it's called a gentleman's agreement. You got to put it in quotes because there's nothing gentlemanly about that agreement until Jack Roosevelt Robinson came to play at Ebbets Field in April of 47. Nothing's happening except it's happening. And Rube Foster and his great genius, first as a player and then as a manager and the creator of this league, is important. And I think I agree with Joe and I agree with Bob that if anybody is anywhere near Kansas City, you have to go. I mean, you know about the barbecue, and around the corner you have Arthur Bryant's.
Right around the corner.
It's hugely important that you visit this, and you don't have to be a baseball fan. The three of you that aren't, because it is the story of America, and it is the story of that affirmation in the face of adversity, of improvisation, of as we discovered once Jackie arrived, the greatest players who ever played the game. And when anyone ever says to me, what's the golden age? The 20 when Ruth comes up, or the 30s when you've got Gehrig and Ruth and you're getting, I said, no, you can't even press start until April 15th, 1947 when Jackie comes. And then you've got the game.
Yeah.
And then you can actually weigh Mickey Mantle next to somebody else. You can say, wow, with so few players permitted into the National League, 1 or 2 a team from the Negro Leagues and other sources, that African Americans win the MVP 9 out of 11 years. That just tells you what you were missing.
Yeah.
And we all know about the barnstorming records.
Yeah.
They're beating those all-star teams consistently.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I think it's important. And Bob, you and I have talked about this on occasion. Look at who the first African-American players were. It's Jackie Robinson. It's Larry Doby. It's Willie Mays. It's Henry Aaron. It's Minnie Minoso. It's Roberto Clemente. It's Frank Robinson. It's Bob Gibson. I mean, these are not just Hall of Famers. They're inner circle greatest ever
Mount
Hall of
Rushmore.
Famers. They're Mount Rushmore players. Ernie Banks. And, I mean, these are the greatest players who ever lived. Think about how good the players 10 years before were. I mean, that's how you have to look at it.
That's how you have to look at it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's what I tell people all the time. If you can imagine baseball without Willie Mays,
right?
Without Henry Aaron, without Ernie Banks, without Roy Campanella, without Roberto Clemente, without Bob Gibson, then you could imagine what it was like before 1947.
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't learn how to play baseball after 1947.
No.
They're playing great baseball well before 1947. And Bob, the other thing, and Ken knows this, and Joe as well, Buck said every genre of music was jazz. It's all jazz.
All jazz.
All jazz.
All jazz.
I love that.
And so he tells a wonderful story. The Monarchs had played here in Kansas City on a Saturday, and they were going to go home, get cleaned up. They were going to come back to 18th and Vine to a nightclub called the Subway. And it was called the Subway because it was literally below street level. And so they said they all get to the nightclub, and they're in the nightclub sipping on a little tea. When a kid walks in, he's got a horn over his shoulder he wants to blow. Everybody said, let him blow. Well, Buck says this kid gets up on the stage. He starts making some noises out of this horn that they never heard before, but you had to pay attention. That kid was 17-year-old Charlie Yardbird Parker, who went to school right up the hill from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum at Lincoln High School. And so that inner circle, Ken, that they travel with all of the great jazz stars. And when you come here to the museum, you see that element. You see Lionel Hampton surrounded by members of the Kansas City Monarchs. And you see the beautiful Lena Horne shown throwing out the first pitch at an all-star game. And there's Cab Calloway in it with his semi-pro black baseball team. And Louis Armstrong with his Armstrong Secret Nine, based out of New Orleans. And I had the great privilege of touring General Colin Powell through the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. One of the highlights of my tenure here at the museum, because he's so regal.
Right.
He's the general. Until we got to that photo of Louis Armstrong and his semi-pro Louis Armstrong team, because his father had played for Louis Armstrong's semi-pro baseball team. And he was reduced to a little boy again. And then after that, he was back to being the general. And it was so cool to see, man.
And, Louis Armstrong was a genuine baseball fan.
Right.
I recall Billy Crystal, and it might have been when he first told it on Ken's baseball series, but he's told it to me subsequently. But you know where I'm going, Ken, so you go ahead. I mean,
he talks about
at Yankee Stadium, right?
He's talking about these. He said we had Louis Armstrong seats. It was one of those things. Yeah, no, it's really important that you brought that up, Bob, because I think that when you're forced to improvise in that way that the rest of us don't have to do, or maybe we're doing it now in COVID, in all of this stuff, but you really you create something special. And there's Buck always described these networks of performers going up to Harlem afterwards and seeing Ella and one name people, Satchmo, all of that sort of stuff. And I think that Billy Crystal's dad was in the music business, and there was this great intersection, and a few of us at different times in more recent times have had the privilege to intersect and feel like their work or just the accidents of what they've done in their lives have permitted them a glimpse into this world. But so much of, I mean, Buck is right. It's all jazz, or it's maybe all the blues. You know what I mean? That I found that working on country music, that this is the same American story, and there's everything is blended together. There are no silos. Only commerce and convenience says, oh, there's country and there's blues and there's R&B and they're all the same. Yeah. And they're listening to each other, and that exchange ought to remind us, as baseball did, that it could be the best of us, right? It could represent the best of us. And having the decision to put Jackie in there and begin to change not just baseball, but America is a huge thing. Obviously, we have, as we know from the last few years, we have way to go. Yeah, long way to go.
I love the dear friend of all of ours, Gerald Early.
Yes.
Right. Said there was 3 genuine pieces of genius in American history: baseball, jazz, and the Constitution.
And the Constitution. And if you think about it, it's all about improvisation. This is a children's simple stick and ball game. Yeah. Nearly every culture has some variation on it. The essence of the Constitution is just 4 pieces of paper written at the end of the 18th century that's able to adjudicate all of our complicated problems in the very complicated 21st century. And then you have, jazz, which is all based on not playing the notes on the page, but listening, Joe and Bob to what you say and trying to listen to who you are and what you're saying and try to put something back. And that's mirrored in baseball, and it's mirrored. And Gerald Early is right. He said, when they study our civilization 1,000 years from now, and if you think what was going on with the human race 1,000 years ago, that's a really long time. They'll be there because they're the most beautiful things that we've invented. And the most beautiful part of baseball is this man whose birthday we're celebrating.
Let's toss this out for our consideration here. There was a time when undeniably baseball was the national pastime of Black America. Mm-hmm. That is no longer true. And sadly, for reasons we will not discuss and what it says about our culture, neither is baseball the most popular sport anymore. It's still the best team sport, as any enlightened person would quickly agree. But by every measure, it has taken a back seat monetarily to football. And there are a number of dynamics at play when it comes to Black America. But in the 1970s, roughly between 25 and 30% of the players in the big leagues were African American. Now, you can't say that number it's diminished into single digits, but not because of barriers. Baseball is looking for talent wherever they can find it. And if you count players of Hispanic heritage, there's more players of color than ever before, and expanding out to Asia or wherever else to find talent. But we'll start with you, Bob Kendrick. How much does it concern you? And is there any path to a better place in terms of increasing African-American representation in the modern game?
Oh, absolutely. And again, maybe it's because I'm the eternal optimist, and perhaps some of that optimism spilled over on me from Buck O'Neil. But I certainly believe that we're going to see this game start to improve as it relates to American-born Blacks participating in this sport. It filled me with tremendous pride to see 2 young Black kids recognized as rookies of the year, even though it was a truncated season, to see them recognized as rookie of the year, and to see the Seattle Mariners break camp this year with 10 Black ball players on their roster, when there were still some rosters that didn't have any. And so, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time. And we've all been trying to figure out where this gap occurred between the Black community and baseball. And I think there are all kinds of theories that are relative to this. But I think the socioeconomic aspect of this plays a tremendous role in what has created this wedge. And our sport, sadly, Bob, went from being a blue-collar sport where it could be played on the sandlots to now being a country club sport where it requires these league fees and specialization and everything that goes along with it. And so it has legitimately priced a lot of kids out of this game. And so for us, we're excited about this beautiful Kansas City Urban Youth Baseball Academy right behind the museum as this bridge to kind of eliminate the economic hurdle. Now, if a kid doesn't like baseball, then that's okay. Yep. But we wanted to make sure that every child at least had the opportunity to play this game. You see, when there was a Negro Leagues, the proliferation of Black businesses that supported opportunities for kids to play baseball. The Black church supported opportunities for kids to play baseball. And so a child never had to worry about finances to play this game. And then that started to change. And the heroes that you saw now up close and personal, because it didn't matter how much money Buck O'Neil made or Satchel Paige made, they lived in the same neighborhood I lived in. So I got to see them every single day.
Right.
And I aspired to be like them, but not just for their athletic prowess, but I aspired to be like them as men. And so this museum was built not just to preserve the history of the Negro Leagues, but also to be this visible representation of Black folks in this game.
Yes.
And so, as you can well imagine, when a child walks into this museum, if he is aspiring to play this game, now he gets to walk inside this place, this wonderful place. And now he sees people who look just like him, who played this game as well as anybody ever played this game. But not only did they play the game, they owned teams, they were managers, they were coaches, they were traveling secretaries, they were team physicians. They fulfilled every role that you could fulfill within the business of the game of baseball. And so it's important that they do understand that they have a proud legacy in this sport. And so we see this museum as part of the solution to trying to help bridge that gap.
You know, Joe, just following up on that, obviously the impact would be greater on people of lesser economic means, the way playing baseball has evolved, travel teams and whatnot. But I've been struck by this. You drive through a relatively affluent neighborhood. You see a perfectly manicured ball field. And unless there's an organized game going on, there are no kids playing.
Right.
If I walked past a ball field when I was 12 years old and there was a game like that, I was going to get 3 or 4 of my friends
and play
the game. Can't hit to right field, whatever the heck it is, of course, at every base. You played baseball. You played stickball in the street. So it isn't just an issue with African Americans, although it might be more acute. It's an issue across the board, don't you think, Joe?
I definitely think so. And I think, look, we can talk about a lot of different elements of this thing, but the specialization of the games has changed the entire dynamic. Bob Kendrick and I had a really interesting conversation. I would say maybe the 3 greatest African-American athletes of the 80s and the 90s were Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, and Michael Jordan. They all loved baseball. They all wanted to play baseball. They loved it more than the sport that they were good at.
Yes.
They loved baseball. And that's not that long ago.
No.
But it's because they played multiple games. They all played baseball and football and basketball. We all grew up doing that.
Yes.
And kids don't do that now. I mean, you have to make early choices. If you want to be a great college football player and a great NFL player eventually, you got to make that choice early. Basketball, you definitely have to make that choice early.
You can't be a 4-letter athlete like Jackie at
right.
UCLA.
Right.
I think that's my thing. It's your positive reaction in Houston is my response to what Bob said, which is, Jackie doesn't open the door just to African Americans in the major leagues. He's opening it to everyone, to the Cuban, to the Latin players, to Roberto Clemente, to the Asian players. And so it's there. And that I see this as part of the just democratic spirit that you're moving into other sports and you're being given opportunities and things are expanding. I mean, let's be honest too, there is a whiteness to baseball that made it unfriendly, both in the location of stadiums, in management, and as you're trained today. Jamie Foxx, who is our voice of Jackie Robinson in our film that we made one-off on him, said that as a kid he wanted to do track and he wanted to do baseball, and his coach said, please just do track. He said, no, I want to do baseball. And he went to the team. Nobody spoke to him. They put him in right field. That was it. And finally, after a few months, he just realized, I get it. You don't want me here. And this is, how old is Jamie Foxx? This must be the late 70s, early 80s at the latest. I mean, at the earliest. And so this is a recent American phenomenon. But at the same time, every time you see an Asian player pitch or hit a Grand Slam home run, Jackie's right there.
Yeah, I agree.
The Negro Leagues as the sort of the front end loader of all of that is right there in our sights. And so I like it. It ebbs and flows, you know, as your Pirates had a all black team one day, which terrified the entire universe. You know? But they were really, 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 really good. And, you know, we get back, you know, the Red Sox used to, you know, were the last to integrate with Pumpsie Green 12 years after Jackie. And, you know, for a while they had 3 or 4 African Americans in their lineup, and that's in their starting lineup. That, you know, it's going to change. And I think what Bob continues to do to see, I mean, what Rube Foster said, you know, we are the ship, all else the sea. What else are we going to do but promote the best team that's ever been invented?
And Bob had Rube Foster, who, when he created the Negro Leagues, thought that he would create a league that was so dynamic that he would force Major League Baseball's hand to expand. So think AFL, NFL, ABA, NBA. And see, under Foster's model, you would have had, number one, complete integration in our game, you know, way before now. But you also would have had the infrastructure in place that would allow you to continue to groom and create these ball players who would have had a place to play unequivocally. You know, the decision makers would have looked like them. And so when you get that borderline guy who sometimes maybe a little raw, and people don't take that chance. See, here we had Lorenzo Cain. And you don't get Lorenzo Cain if someone did not have the acute mindset to see something in this kid who had not played baseball, but he was a tremendous athlete, and we're going to give him a chance. And they gave him a chance. And Lorenzo Cain, thank you, Lo, for helping bring a world championship here to Kansas City, to the great Kansas City Royals. And Dave Moore and I were on one of these kinds of Zoom calls, and we were talking about in the American League Championship Series, when Lo Cain scores from first base on a single against the Toronto Blue Jays. Now he's channeled the spirit of the Negro Leagues on this. First base, and when he makes that pop-up slide, and the reaction in Kauffman Stadium was absolutely electric. Man, that was the Negro Leagues. And we need that back in this game again.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I tell the commissioner all the time, you know, you don't have to put a clock on the game. Just give me something that I want to see. I'll sit there all day and watch it.
I think we started off with the idea of stories, and this whole thing is about personalities too. Really compelling personalities that aren't cookie cutter, that aren't forged, that aren't Nuke LaLoosh saying, I'm just trying to play within myself, and all this sort of BS that you get that modern sports kind of imposes on you. You have characters where, you know, Satchel's going to call in the outfield and break out Josh Gibson, and, you know, a pee at the knee and smoke at the throat. And, I mean, you don't get that anywhere else. So.
No, and you don't. And I love that, because I had to, you know, Bob, I don't know if it was the last time that you were here, but you were with Willie Mays, and Joe was with us as well.
That's right.
And we get here, and the lights were just a little too much for Willie, but we get right there to the field, and Buck looks off and points to Oscar Charleston in center field, and he says, Willie, that was you before you were ever here. You know, and that old guy does. And so we fast forward, I'm in San Francisco, and we go out to the ballpark, and Willie is there that day. And so my host takes me over and arranges time for me to spend with Willie Mays. Again, just one of the great benefits of being a part of this job. I'm hanging out with Willie Mays now. And so we're down in the parking area of the ballpark. And Brian Murphy, who's the radio talk guy out there in San Francisco, he asked Willie, he says, Willie, did you ever face Satchel Paige? And Willie lights up. I mean, he lights up. And you all know Willie kind of has a very high-pitched voice. He said, yeah, I faced Satchel. I faced Satchel when I was 17 years old, and the first time against him, I got a double. Well, Satchel didn't know who this kid was. He grooves one. Willie hits it in the gap. He gets a double. He said, the next time up, Satchel threw 3 straight right by me. I never saw it. and as I'm walking back to the dugout, he steps off the mound. He says, now go sit down, little boy.
Right.
Here is arguably the greatest major leaguer of all time, regaling and being struck out by Satchel Paige.
Yep.
You only get this in baseball.
Yep.
Yeah, this is what the beauty of baseball, and it's probably why it is the most romanticized sport of them all. But sadly, this chapter in and around the Negro Leagues for so long had been left out. Right. And now those personalities that Ken is talking about and those great characters are finally surfacing, and people are getting to learn about them. Now, they may not always believe the stories that I'm sharing with them, the great feats that these guys accomplished, but they're at least starting to pay attention again. And we're building a new generation of followers of the history of the Negro Leagues, which, as you well know, is the history of this country.
That's right.
Well, that reminds me of something. Yeah, are some of the stories apocryphal? Are they exaggerated but essentially true? That's what legend is. And the word legend, it's like unbelievable. You're watching SportsCenter and someone says, this was he had an unbelievable game. He scored 24 points and got 11 rebounds. That's a good game. I don't find it difficult to believe because I've seen it many times. Guy goes 3 for 4. It was unbelievable. No, it's quite within the realm of the believable. The other word among many that's misused, legend. Right. The legendary so-and-so. This may sound like sacrilege, but Michael Jordan is much less legendary than Satchel Paige.
Right.
Because as wonderful as he was, and apply every appropriate adjective to his greatness, we saw almost all of it chronicled. We can go back on a DVR and look at it frame by frame. So when you hear about Satchel Paige, or for that matter, about Ty Cobb or Babe Ruth or whatever the case may be, or Jack Johnson or Jack Dempsey, that's where legend comes in, because a lot of it is word of mouth. And every good story needs an element of legend, not a lie, but an element of legend.
A wink, and an acknowledgement of this. The story is not just the repetition of facts, but it's also what we need, something a little bit better. And that's what's great. I mean, we give out a Cy Young Award, and we think that Satchel Paige had 4 times as many victories as Cy Young, and nobody's ever come close to Cy Young, and we can't prove it. We can't prove it.
Joe wrote a piece. Joe, I don't even know if you remember this because you've written so many wonderful pieces, but he wrote a piece once where he just looked at Satchel Paige's career after the Negro Leagues, what he was able to accomplish in the major leagues, and then put that into perspective. You know, and this is discounting that he might have been 10 years older than what we all believe that he was.
As we said, 52 or 49 or 51, you know.
And what he did was absolutely amazing. So all of a sudden, this lore in and around this almost mythical-like athlete. And one of my favorite stories, he's pitching for the St. Louis Browns. And this is 1952, I believe. He's pitching for the Browns. And if you believe that he was born in 1906, he's now 46 years old.
Right.
And he pitches a 13-inning, 1-0 shutout against the Detroit Tigers. Yeah, at either 46 or 56. Yeah, which is just absolutely astounding to think. And we're talking about a guy who in his prime was a premier power pitcher. Right. We're not talking about Jamie Moyer, who was a great pitcher, but he threw junk at. He threw junk at you. Satchel was a power pitcher. Prolific power pitcher who was still doing this into his 40s, 50s, maybe 60s and 70s. You know, so all of a sudden, but for me, I tell people all the time, there's one photograph that kind of brings the Negro Leagues in perspective for a lot of our guests. And it's a little nondescript photograph of an 18-year-old Henry Aaron standing at the train station in Mobile, Alabama. Yeah. And Bob, all he has is a duffel bag. And he's about to get on the train to go join the Indianapolis Clowns in 1952, where at that time he was a skinny, cross-handed hitting shortstop. And so most of our guests, they really did not know that Henry Aaron's career began in the Negro Leagues. Yep. So all of a sudden, when they see Henry Aaron, it goes back to what you said about Michael Jordan.
Right.
Everything about Henry Aaron, you saw it transpire in the major leagues. You were able to witness it. And then all of a sudden, this other chapter of his baseball career comes to formation. Hey, that is pretty good. That's pretty good, guys.
That's fantastic.
It is, yeah.
That's fantastic.
And so you're able to witness this, and that brings it in perspective. So then people start to say, well, maybe Josh Gibson was that good. Maybe Cool Papa Bell was that good.
Yes.
It's really interesting because the story I thought you were going to bring up, Bob, was I wrote a piece when Barry Bonds came to the museum. Now, we all have our own views on Barry Bonds, whatever the case may be. But the piece I wrote was about how if Barry Bonds had been in the Negro Leagues, you wouldn't believe the stories.
Right.
You wouldn't believe that he could really do the things that he did before the steroids, after the steroids, whatever the case may be. He was obviously this extraordinary player. And you would talk about a guy who could steal you 50 bases and hit 30 home runs and play Gold Glove defense. And you'd be like, come on, and that's legend. And right. To me, when Barry Bonds walked through the museum, he read that piece, which is, strange enough. And he was in tears walking through the museum, thinking about all of these guys we'll never really know. We know Josh Gibson was amazing, but how amazing. And, that's, I think, Bob, what you're talking about when you're talking about legend.
Yes.
Oh, there's no question. And, I had the honor of taking Barry on that trip, and it was as humbling an experience for him as anything. And he calls Willie Mays from the gift shop, his godfather. And he says, I'm here because, and I've said this on countless occasions, guys, this is a wonderful experience for any player of any color.
Yeah.
But if you are Black or of Hispanic descent, when you come here, this is Mecca.
Right.
Yeah, these are your roots, man.
It's home.
And yeah, it is. It's home. And you don't play this game. There is no and, if, buts about it. You don't play this game had it not been for these folks who are so beautifully brought to life here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Agreed.
And so, yes, you do owe a great deed of gratitude for those who, as the late, great Buck O'Neil would say, Joe, who built the bridge. Yeah. More times than not, guys, we celebrate the people who crossed over the bridge.
Right.
Here at the Negro League Baseball Museum, we celebrate the people who built the bridge. Yeah. And that's important that the young athlete doesn't forget that. And so for me, it's always exciting to take ball players through this museum. I don't care what color they are, because it resonates with them. They feel it when they come here. And I do think they walk away with a better appreciation and a greater perspective of just how good they have it today.
Right. I agree.
We're approaching the ninth inning here. Let me just toss a couple of things out. Does it matter in the big picture that technically Buck O'Neil is not in the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown? There is a statue, an impressive statue of him when you walk in, which has equal standing with Ted Williams' statue and others. And there is a Buck O'Neil Award, which is given to someone who isn't necessarily a player, might be a player of lesser achievement, but overall contributions to the game. So he has been immortalized in that way. But shortly before Buck's death, a committee of supposed experts and scholars about the Negro Leagues got together, and they were going to pretty much clean house. Let's take care of everybody who's been overlooked. One by one, they'd let the most obvious names in: Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson and Oscar Charleston and Cool Papa Bell. And they were electing one per year. But then they decided, let's wrap the whole thing up. And this committee looked at things too literally. Statistically, Buck was a good but not great player in the Negro Leagues. And in fact, many seasons he didn't even play a full season. He'd have like 80 or 90 at bats. So they looked at it through this narrow prism. But are there 14 people more important to the history of the Negro Leagues than Buck O'Neil? So as somebody once said, Joe Posnanski, that may be correct, but it ain't right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right. I mean, was he a good enough player? Was he a good enough manager? They don't put scouts in the Negro Leagues in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And of course, he's one of the greatest all-time scouts. He was the first African-American coach. So you have all of these pieces, and they looked at them individually rather than at one. Bob, Kendrick, and I have told the story 1,000 times of us being there with Buck when he found out. And I think I think there's two different ways to look at sort of where we go from here with it. For Bob and I, and maybe you both feel the same way, knowing Buck, it doesn't matter to me if he goes into the Hall of Fame. And he was so beloved. The Hall of Fame itself idolizes him. The people at the Hall of Fame could not have a higher opinion of him. That statue is right there to welcome you. And so I think for us, it was all about Buck feeling what it was like to be there. And, of course, he spoke on the day that they put in 17 Negro Leaguers, even if he wasn't one of them. He spoke on that day anyway. So I think
the number wrong, 17, not
17, right.
Go ahead.
But Buck, if he was, we wanted him to be there. We wanted us to appreciate what it was like to watch Buck accept that honor. We wanted that celebration. And with him gone, it's not the same. By the same token, so many people would be moved and touched if the Hall of Fame did induct Buck O'Neil. The fight has never stopped. And so for all of those people, I want it to happen. I want them to enjoy that. I think for us, knowing Buck, it sort of ended the day that he didn't get in. Yeah. But I think we would love it for all those people. And Bob, we thought about that.
Joe, I
think about it, exactly it's right. An appropriate near final chapter. Yeah. Others would have been embittered, might have boycotted the ceremony. Right. Not only did he show up, but he gave the keynote speech.
Beautiful.
Part of his decency and transcendent graciousness.
Yes. Exactly. So, I had the privilege of getting to know Yogi Berra in the last, couple decades of his life. And one day Yogi came up and said, out to me, and then walked away. And I turned to Ernie Banks and I just said, what was that? And he goes, oh, when Jackie stole home, he's sure that he was out. So for the rest of Yogi's life, whenever I saw him, we'd always manage to say safe or out to each other, back and forth yelling. It was nice shtick. And so I sort of feel like that. We was robbed, Joe.
Yes.
Buck handled it the way Buck would handle it. Us lesser mortals, I really feel like we need him in there. And yet, Bob Costas, you described an interesting situation where he's not among, all those plaques. He's got his own statue there. It's really in a premier location. It's hard to miss. You have to tell a story, as you do even in a game that owes more to statistics than any other game. Quick, tell me how many passing yards the highest quarterback has, but anybody knows all the other numbers of baseball. So I'm just bittersweet. We have been denied, as you suggest, Joe, that thrill of it, and we couldn't have him to do it. But there he was, Bob Costas, singing in the class he should have been at the head of.
Yes.
And that to me is the whole story of the Negro Leagues. It's the whole story of Buck. It's the story of the United States. It's all of these complicated things. So we celebrate the bittersweet aspects of all of that today and, miss just our friend much.
Spiritually, we liken it to Moses leading the people to the promised land and being denied to cross over himself.
And not getting there himself,
But the human side of us, Bob, and I think we all feel like we were robbed of this opportunity, and Joe alluded to it, because we wanted to high five with our guy. We wanted to bump chest with our guy. We wanted to hug our guy. And we don't get that opportunity. But Joe is right, for his fans who have remained so vigilant about this man belonging in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, it would be almost impossible not to celebrate with them, because they kept this thing going for 14 years. Yeah. I had kind of forgotten about it. Once he got the statue and the Buck O'Neil Lifetime Achievement Award, which was a brilliant way to perpetuate the legacy of Buck O'Neil, because now you will never be able to forget Buck. And just as importantly, you will never be able to forget his museum. Every time that award is presented, you're going to remember Buck. And if you're going to remember Buck, you got to remember his museum. But for a lot of us,
17, had he been among the 17, he would have made it 18. Chances are there wouldn't have been a statue.
Right. No, you don't get the statue. No, you don't. No, you don't get the statue. But you think about this, guys. When a loved one passes, we are not grieving for them. We're grieving for us.
That's right.
Because we lost somebody that we care about. And really, that's what we felt that day when he didn't get in. And there was old Buck wrapping his arms. And Joe was here that day. And man, there's over 300 people down here where I am right now on the Field of Legends. And there were well over 300 people. And there was Buck O'Neil, Bob, wrapping his arms literally around this room and a nation of baseball fans and saying to all of us,
it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay. And that's what we need to translate our sense of loss, obviously in keeping his memory alive and the memory of the Negro League alive, but continue to do the work that he did, which is, priceless. And this is not just a sports story. This is a human story. This is a man in the fullest sense of the word, and about as influential in my life personally as just about anybody I can think of.
Maybe that should be the last word. Closing thought, Joe or Bob Kendrick. I think we've touched all the bases pretty much in the space of an hour or so.
With the Masters going on in Augusta, Buck was an avid golfer. As Ken knows, he shot 75 when he was 75. Right. He shot 94 when he was 94. His last round of golf we played together, he was 94 years old. And this would be a special day for him to enjoy the Masters. And he knew Swope Park. Swope Park was his favorite place to play golf. And so I was telling a story, and I'd finished doing a presentation, and a guy afterwards says, "You know how I first met Buck O'Neil?" I said, "No, how you met Buck?" He said, I was out at Swope Park, and I'm on the tee box, and I just dribbled one off the tee. And this old black man came up to me, looked me dead in my eyes, and said, "You ever thought about taking up bowling?" and it was Buck O'Neil. And he said Buck reached out and gave him a big hug. And that is how he met Buck O'Neil. And for me, that exuberance is what I will always remember about Buck O'Neil. But he was certainly a good-natured trash talker as well.
Joe Posnanski, your book, The Soul of Baseball, came out more than a decade ago, but if people want to catch up with it, how do they do it?
It is still available. It is stunning to me how that book still resonates with people. It's amazing to me how often people ask me about it, talk about it. It's available certainly on all of the Amazon and bookshop.org and all the others.
And the Negro League Baseball Museum.com.
And if you're at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, that's the best place to buy it, of course.
It's not surprising to me, Joe, why it's still out there.
Thank you.
Ken,
yeah.
As we speak, the Major League Baseball Network, as it does every offseason, is playing your baseball documentary in its entirety, but now it's been enhanced. You can tell us more about that. But while Buck O'Neil is sprinkled throughout it, he's most prominent in the episode devoted to the Negro Leagues, Shadow Ball.
That's exactly right, which is the fifth episode, the fifth inning. So just briefly, it was shot in a format like this. We watch TVs like this. We've converted every frame. We've gone through thousands of miles of footage, and every single frame painstakingly restored to Ultra HD 4K, and it looks gorgeous. I'm seeing details in it that I've never seen before, and we haven't lost that much sides and bottoms. If you think about it's not stretched, it's just it's fantastic and it's beautiful. It's a whole new film, and I've been watching it too, as if I needed to watch the film again. But it's great to go back and remember about Three Fingered Brown and see Buck sing as you just had, Bob, and just follow the story of our game, the greatest game that's ever been invented. Period. Full stop. I'll see you outside the bar.
And speaking of Buck singing and his beautiful rendition of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" in the documentary, it still gives me chills. And this year, the Kansas City Royals, Bob, came up with a brilliant idea of creating a Buck O'Neil singing bobblehead.
There it is.
Where he's singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." Well, let me tell you, they just let me know today on Buck's 109th birthday that they sold enough of those bobbleheads to donate $100,000 to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
great.
Happy birthday, Buck.
Happy birthday,
and happy birthday, Bob.
Bob Kendrick, Ken Burns, Joe Posnanski, thank you. Thank you to all of you who joined us for this streaming celebration of the 109th birthday of one of the most luminous figures in baseball history, our friend, Buck O'Neil. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Ta-da.